True crime, as I always say, our society can't get enough of it, but this one is sort of a different take. You kind of know that there's a glimmer of hope, sort of, for these families, but obviously it's still all about the victims and their story. I'm talking with executive producer Brad Bernstein of Hulu's How I Caught My Killer. So thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
Yeah, so tell us, give us a little backstory. Obviously, this is the second season, but what is How I Caught My Killer about?
Sure. It's a documentary series, a 10-parter. And really the gist of it is the conceit is that the victims left something behind that helped law enforcement solve their crimes, whether that's a piece of video, whether it's a text message, whether it's a love letter. Without that piece of evidence, the cases A may never have been solved, and B may never have been solved in the length of time that it took. And as we all know, as you just mentioned it, there's a lot of true crime stories out there. The longer an investigation goes on, the harder it is to solve.
You're absolutely right. And it can be so hard to watch. A lot of these stories are from people that are in these just closed off societies, or they're victimized, and it's people in the LGBTQ plus community, people who are Black. It's just different religions. It's a lot of these are could honestly be considered hate crimes if we go there. What is that about these stories that draw you to this project?
Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about how true crime is saturated now in America, and there's a lot of networks talking about different stories. A lot of networks do not actually focus on underserved communities. And to Hulu's credit, that's what this series is all about. I mean, the series, the majority of our cases are for underserved or invisible communities. So it's really important for us to tell their stories because otherwise they wouldn't be represented. And people have to understand that in many cases, for some of the communities you just mentioned, these stories aren't told. They're not investigated necessarily with the rigor that maybe a 25-year-old blonde girl's story would be investigated. And so it's important for us to bring light to that, and so to make sure that there's parity in the investigations.
Yes, and I'm sure the victims' families are so thankful that this gets covered and in this sort of way. What is the vetting process like? Obviously, the second season is 10 episodes. What's the process like of choosing these 10 stories and getting that told?
Yeah, the vetting process is actually a pretty amazing gauntlet. Now, first of all, we're very rigorous as far as making sure that the stories hit the conceit, hit the premise of the series. We're very particular in how we're telling the stories, and that necessitates the involvement and the participation and the kind of love and care of the family members of the victims, and also of the homicide detectives and the prosecutors. So it really is kind of a 360 process. It's not just whether a story hits the conceit; it's whether we have full participation from a family or from law enforcement. Because without that, it's really hard for us to tell the stories in a way that we think the victim deserves. So that's important for us. So the vetting process is extensive and exhaustive, and it includes kind of everyone attached to a story.
And what I really like about this is, yes, it's a true crime series. Yes, it's gripping and what everyone wants to see, but I can tell this show is very true to honoring the victim and making sure their voice is heard. What was that process like of making sure you guys put it in that perspective?
Yeah, Trevor, I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, that's the biggest thing for us, is making sure that the victim's family feels heard, making sure that the victim's legacy is kept intact. That's really important for us. I mean, we made our first true crime series 11 years ago, and I still talk to that family today. So we become friends with the families, we empathize with them, and that's really important to us. And so this season, I'm proud to say that still is in existence, and it's probably the most meaningful thing, like why we do this, why we tell these stories. So.
And with this second season, it's 10 episodes. Is there a certain story or episode, I guess, that really stuck out to you that you think audiences are just going to gravitate toward and be involved in?
It's such an interesting question because it's hard to pick one above all.
Well,
There's a story in Clayton County, Georgia, actually, of a rapper named Raheem Grant. And his story, it's not so much that there was a twisty, although there was a twisty turning investigation. But I think, again, going back to like dispelling people's myths, or talking about underserved communities, he was a rapper, aspiring rapper in Clayton County, Georgia. And so you have a perception, or a lot of people have a perception of what that person may be. And actually, he kind of turns that perception on its head. And it's a really interesting story. And his murder was solved because of what he did on his phone. And it's a really worthy episode of watching if you're going to watch one of the 10. But I think all 10 are, are stories we care about.
They definitely are all stories we care about. I'm so excited for people to see the second season of How I Caught My Killer. We know that there's an end, maybe not the best ending that we hope, but make sure you watch How I Caught My Killer on Hulu streaming now. Thanks a lot, Brad.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.